Good evening, friends. Welcome back, or welcome here, if this is your very first time joining me. Tonight, we're going to wander far back into history together. So before we begin, I invite you to do something simple. Dim your lights, nestle yourself under your blanket, take a long, slow breath in, and an even slower breath out. Let your shoulders drop. You don't have to hold anything up right now. This is your time, a soft, quiet moment, just for you. Tonight, we'll drift into the misty landscapes of feudal Japan, a time when samurai rode through mountain passes, lords ruled from wooden castles, and humble peasants carried most of the weight of the world on their bent, tired backs. Our story is not about shoguns or emperors, but about the ordinary people who lived lives so hard. They almost sound unbelievable, but instead of rushing through, we'll let the story unfold gently, as if you and I are sitting by a crackling hearth together, sipping something warm. And as we settle in, just a tiny reminder, if this calm journey helps you unwind, you might consider tapping like or subscribe, only if it feels right for you. No pressure. Think of it more like leaving a candle burning in the window, so we can always find each other again. Now, let us walk slowly into the rice fields at dawn. Imagine a pale sky, still painted in the bruised colors of night, soft purples, faded blues. A thin mist curls above the earth, almost like the ground itself is exhaling after a long, heavy sleep. Birds begin their cautious chirps, hesitant at first, then bolder as the sun stretches over the horizon. You can hear the faint drip-drip of dew sliding from grass blades into the water channels that snake through the fields. In those fields, bent figures move. Peasants, barefoot, their straw sandals damp before the day has even begun. Their robes are simple, patched over and over, the cloth rough against skin. Some wear straw hats, not the fashionable kind you might imagine in art, but crude ones woven at home, prickly and uneven, meant to keep the sun off later in the day. For now, the morning air is cool enough to bite at their fingers. Let me tell you something curious. In feudal Japan, especially around the 15th and 16th centuries, rice was not just food, it was money, wealth, power. Samurai lords, the daimyo, measured their worth not in gold coins, but in koku of rice. One koku was roughly enough to feed a person for a year. Imagine that. Your salary, your bank account, all reduced to bags of grain. Strange, isn't it? The closest thing today would be if your boss told you, "Congratulations, your raise is 600 watermelons." Practical? Not really. But rice was life, and peasants were the ones who coaxed it, grain by grain, from the earth. Now picture the waterlogged fields. The mud is thick and eager to claim anything that dares step into it. The peasants' feet sink with each move, sucking sounds marking every step, like the earth doesn't want to let them go. They bend low, planting seedlings in neat rows, their backs already aching before the morning sun climbs. The work is hypnotic. Plant, step, sink, plant again, and all around them is the soft hum of frogs, the buzz of insects, the distant cough of a crow. Have you ever crouched too long while gardening or tying a shoe and felt your knees complain? Imagine holding that position for hours day after day, while balancing in mud that clings and pulls. The peasants' lives were like that. Endless repetition, physical strain so constant it became invisible. You didn't ask if your back hurt. It always did. And yet, the rhythm of it all could feel strangely soothing. If you listen, can't you hear it? The splash of water as a sleeve dips, the rustle of straw as someone shifts, the gentle slap of a hand against a mosquito. Even in hardship, there was music. Food, too, was both comfort and punishment. A peasant's meal might be a simple bowl of rice, gruel, thin and watery, perhaps with a few pickled vegetables, if luck allowed. Sometimes they could chew roasted barley mixed into the rice, which had a nutty, earthy taste. Chewy, filling, though far from luxurious. Imagine biting into that after a day bent double under the sun. It wasn't pizza, but it was survival, and humor still slipped in. People would joke about the endless rice, boiled, gruel, cakes, dumplings. Rice was their medieval Pop-Tart, filling every roll. Whether you liked it or not, someone might laugh quietly. Another rice ball for lunch? Well, maybe tomorrow the gods will surprise me with two. The seasons, too, ruled the peasants' lives. Spring meant planting, summer meant weeding, autumn meant harvesting, and winter was the brief pause, though pause really just meant repairing tools, mending homes, and preparing for the cycle again. It was an endless treadmill, powered by sun and soil. And yet, in those quiet dawns, there was also beauty. Imagine pausing in the mud, wiping your brow, and seeing Mount Fuji in the far distance, its peak dusted with snow, glowing pink in the morning light. Imagine listening to the laughter of children running along the edges of the fields, their giggles mixing with the croaks of frogs. Imagine knowing that while life was hard, the land was steady, and tomorrow would look much like today. The brutality of peasant life was not only in the work, but in the taxes. Whatever rice was grown, much of it was taken by the lords. Some estimates say peasants gave up half their harvest. Half. Imagine working a whole garden and then handing your neighbor every second tomato. No choice, no negotiation. That was just the rule. And if a year was bad, if storms or pests wiped out crops, the tax was still demanded. Hunger, then, was an uninvited guest who arrived often and stayed too long. Yet peasants endured. They whispered prayers at shrines, tied paper fortunes to branches, and trusted that maybe next year the harvest would be kinder. They found small joys, the sweetness of chestnuts roasted over a fire, the rare treat of miso soup rich enough to warm the bones, the simple delight of a good story told at night. And perhaps tonight, as you listen, you can hear that same hum of endurance, the steady rhythm of footsteps in mud, the soft sigh of dawn breaking, the crackle of a small fire where someone waits to boil tea leaves, their aroma drifting like a gentle promise. Life was brutal, yes, but it was also quiet, patient, and strangely grounding, like the earth itself, teaching its people how to bow, to bend, and to endure. And as the sun rises higher, and the peasants straighten only for a moment to stretch aching spines, let us, too, stretch and drift onward. The rice fields are alive, but our journey through them can soften now, like mist dissolving in morning light. And as we leave that field behind, let your mind wander to where the peasants might go next. Let us drift further, away from the flooded rice fields and into the village itself. Imagine the narrow dirt paths winding between wooden houses, their walls darkened by smoke and rain, their thatched roofs sagging in places where last winter's snow pressed too heavily. The air is alive with the faint scent of wood smoke, of damp straw, and of something earthy, almost sweet, the smell of miso paste fermenting quietly in clay jars. The village stirs like a single body. A rooster calls somewhere in the distance, its cry breaking the last of the night. Dogs bark, low and half-hearted, as if they too are weary from yesterday. From one doorway, you might see a woman crouched, feeding chickens with careful handfuls of millet. The birds cluck and peck, their feathers rustling like silk sheets being shaken out. Children scamper barefoot, chasing each other between huts, their laughter high and shrill like flutes. Their hair is messy, their clothes simple, but their energy fills the quiet corners. And over it all, there is that endless background hum of work. Someone chops firewood, the thud of axe into wood echoing steady, like a heartbeat. Someone else weaves straw sandals, their hands moving rhythmically, fibers scratching against a skin. A pot boils in one home, its lid rattling as steam escapes, carrying the aroma of barley porridge. Let me tell you a curious truth about these villages. Though the peasants owned little, their lives were not entirely empty of joy. At night, neighbors would gather and share stories. Some tales were of fox spirits, sly tricksters who could change into beautiful women and lure men into forests. Others were of wandering monks who performed small miracles, healing a fever or finding a lost child. Imagine hearing those tales by the dim glow of an oil lamp, shadows flickering against the walls. The voice of the storyteller soft and melodic, weaving magic into the air. But daylight brought a heavier tone. You see, peasants in feudal Japan were bound not just by their work, but by their obligations. They could not simply pack up and leave their village. Their lives were tethered, like boats moored to a dock. The daimyo, the lord, controlled not only their taxes, but also their freedom. Movement was restricted. Even dreams had borders. Imagine living like that, wanting to see what lay beyond the hills, but knowing your feet were not allowed to carry you there. Taxes weren't always taken in rice alone. Sometimes the lords demanded corvée labor, days spent repairing roads, or building fortifications, or serving the needs of their betters. Picture being pulled from your own small farm, where weeds creep like thieves through your barley, and told to spend a week carrying stones for a castle wall that you'll never be allowed inside. You could grumble quietly, but open refusal, that was unthinkable. Punishment could be swift and harsh. Even so, the villagers found ways to soften the edges. Food, again, played its part. A savory snack of grilled fish, sprinkled lightly with salt, was a treasure. Have you ever tasted something so simple, yet felt it anchor you? Like a piece of bread after a long hike, or hot noodles on a rainy night. For peasants, fish was not always available. But when it was, the smell of it roasting over coals could make the whole village hungry at once. Sometimes sweet treats appeared, though rarely. Millet cakes made with coarse grain and perhaps sweetened with a drizzle of syrup or honey were passed around on special days. Imagine biting into one, dense, chewy, slightly gritty between the teeth, but with just enough sweetness to make your eyes widen. To a tired farmer, it was as though the gods themselves had gifted a pastry. Think of it like a medieval Japanese energy bar. And then, festivals. Ah, the festivals. They were rare bursts of color in otherwise gray routines. Lanterns glowed, drums pounded, flutes sang, rice wine, sake, loosened tongues and laughter. Children wore small masks of foxes or demons, running between stalls where roasted chestnuts and dumplings were sold. For one night, peasants were not bent under taxes or toil, but lifted by music, community, and the illusion of freedom. Imagine walking through that. The air rich with smoke and spice, your ears filled with rhythm, your heart forgetting, just for a while, the heaviness of tomorrow. Yet even in festivals, shadows lingered. Samurai could appear, their presence a reminder that power was always close. The gleam of swords, the stern set of faces, the unspoken truth that joy existed only within boundaries. Still, peasants danced anyway. They laughed louder, perhaps because they knew the laughter was borrowed time. Life was brutal, yes, but it was also layered. Hardship and sweetness, duty and laughter, silence and song, like the texture of old wood, rough in places, smooth where countless hands have passed. Let me tell you one small historical note to ground us here. Around the 16th century, villages often organized themselves into groups of 5 households, known as goningumi. These groups were held collectively responsible for each member's behavior. If one family failed to pay taxes, the others suffered. If one person broke the law, all bore the punishment. Imagine the tension. Your neighbor's choices could cost you dearly, yet at the same time, it meant survival was shared. In a strange way, it bound the village closer, like sticks tied into a bundle that could not easily be broken. As the day in the village stretches on, the sun grows warm, shadows shorten, the dirt paths fill with the dust of footsteps, the chatter of voices, the smell of sweat mixing with straw. Chickens wander, pecking at fallen grains. Children's laughter fades into the softer murmur of lullabies as babies are rocked to sleep. Time moves gently, like water in a stream, carrying people forward, whether they wish it or not. And as twilight falls, the village changes again. Oil lamps flicker to life. Crickets sing in a rising chorus. A pot of soup bubbles somewhere, its broth thin but fragrant. Families sit close, shoulders touching, bowls in hand. They speak softly, or sometimes not at all, letting silence weave comfort between them. Outside, the night deepens, the stars prickling awake one by one. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The low hum of voices inside a hut, the hiss of fire on damp wood, the distant bark of a dog. Life continues, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. And as we step softly out of that village, leaving the lanterns glowing behind us, Let your mind wander. Where will our journey take us next? Perhaps to the roads that stretch beyond the village, where travelers move like shadows between worlds. Now, let us wander away from the small, clustered houses of the village and step onto the long, dusty roads that connect one settlement to another. Picture them stretching like ribbons, uneven and narrow, carved by centuries of footsteps, hooves, and wooden cartwheels. These roads were not the grand highways of emperors. They were earthy, bumpy tracks where dust rose in summer and mud clung in spring rains. Imagine walking them barefoot, the soil warm beneath your soles, tiny pebbles pressing into your skin with every step. If you were lucky enough to own straw sandals, they would fray quickly, the fibers snapping, soles thinning until your toes poked through. Travelers sometimes tied scraps of cloth around their feet when sandals wore out, a poor man's solution to miles of ground that never ended. But the roads were not just physical paths. They were veins of life. Along them, peasants trudged with baskets of firewood strapped to their backs. Women carried bundles of vegetables to market, and wandering monks passed with slow steps, chanting softly, their beads clicking like a quiet metronome. Merchants, too, moved along these roads, leading pack horses burdened with salt, cloth, or tea. To meet one was a reminder of a wider world beyond the rice paddies. Let me tell you, travel for a peasant was rare. They were tied to their land by duty and law. But sometimes necessity forced a journey, perhaps to sell extra grain at market, or to attend a festival in another village, or to deliver tax payments to a local magistrate. These trips were small escapes, but they were also exhausting. Picture walking for hours, the sun heavy on your shoulders, a basket biting into your back. Every hill felt steeper than the last, and along the way, dangers lingered. Bandits prowled the forests, waiting for lone travelers. A peasant carrying rice might feel the prickling fear of eyes watching from the trees. Some stories tell of peasants hiding their coins in bamboo flutes or beneath layers of straw in baskets. Praying robbers would overlook them. Sometimes it worked, sometimes not. Imagine the anxiety of each snapping twig. Food along the road was meager. A small cloth bundle might hold rice balls, onigiri, seasoned with nothing more than a pinch of salt, or perhaps a dab of pickled plum in the center. That sour tang, sharp and mouth-watering, was a tiny luxury. If you've ever bitten into a lemon drop after hours of bland snacks, you know the feeling. The rice ball was the closest thing they had to a medieval hot pocket, portable, compact, and designed to fuel weary legs. If they were fortunate enough to pass a roadside tea house, the experience was like stumbling upon an oasis. Imagine ducking under a low doorway into a dim, cool space, the air filled with the smell of roasted tea leaves. A pot simmers over charcoal, releasing fragrant steam. You sit on a woven mat, stretching aching legs, and someone pours you a small cup of green tea. Bitter at first, then soothing. The warmth spreads through your chest. Perhaps they serve a simple snack. Roasted chestnuts, still hot, their skins blackened and smoky, their insides sweet and soft. For a traveler, It was a feast, yet most peasants could not afford such indulgences. Many simply crouched by the roadside, chewing cold rice while watching others pass. Still, even in those pauses, there was beauty. Birds sang in the trees. The breeze lifted strands of hair, damp with sweat. A dragonfly landed on a stick nearby, its wings glittering like glass. Roads were also places of meeting. Imagine a peasant walking with a heavy basket and suddenly falling into step beside a traveling monk. The monk might tell tales of distant temples, of mountains wrapped in clouds, of rituals performed at sunrise. For a villager who had never seen beyond the next valley, these words were windows into another world. Perhaps they even laughed together, sharing a rice ball, and then, like shadows, they parted, each continuing along their own thread of the road. Let me share a small historical anchor here. During the Edo period, beginning in 1603, the Tokugawa shogunate built and maintained 5 major highways, the Gokaido, connecting key regions, but peasants rarely set foot on those great routes. They were meant for lords, officials, and merchants. Ordinary farmers stuck mostly to local byways, small, twisting paths, less traveled but no less important. Their journeys were quieter, humbler, but no less full of meaning. Evenings on the road were their own challenge. When the sun dipped low, the sky glowing orange and violet, peasants sought shelter. Inns existed, but many were out of reach for the poor. Instead, a traveler might sleep under a tree, wrapping themselves in a straw cloak against the chill. The sounds of night filled the air, the croak of frogs, the buzz of cicadas, the distant howl of a fox. A small fire might be lit, crackling softly, sending sparks into the dark. Imagine lying on the ground, gazing at stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, while your stomach ached with hunger, but your heart ached more for home. Sometimes, villages along the way offered charity. A family might share a bowl of thin millet porridge with a passing traveler. The porridge steamed, warm and bland, but to the weary it tasted like kindness. Have you ever noticed how even plain food can feel extraordinary when given freely? That was the flavor of generosity. Simple, but unforgettable. The roads also carried whispers, rumors of wars, of famines, of uprisings, traveled along them. A wandering peddler might bring news of a distant battle, his voice low, his eyes wary. Stories passed from one traveler to another, like smoke carried by the wind. And so, even a peasant who never left his province might hear of grand events far beyond his reach. But at the heart of it, the dusty roads were not grand stages. They were lived in small, weary steps. Every pebble, every gust of wind, every shared rice ball told the story of survival. And as night thickens, and we imagine a peasant curling under a straw mat, the fire dying low, let us pause here too. The road stretches on, infinite, but our footsteps can rest for now. The hum of insects lulls us. The sky above twinkles, and sleep drapes itself like a soft cloak. And as we leave this traveler to their dreams, let your mind wander to the castles that loom in the distance, towering structures of wood and stone, where the lords who demanded so much from peasants lived lives that seemed almost unreal. And so, from the dusty roads we'd followed in the last chapter, Let us now drift toward the silhouette of a castle rising in the distance. Picture it standing tall against the evening sky. Wide wooden gates, walls of stone stacked carefully, rooftops curved like the wings of cranes. These castles were not just homes, they were symbols of power, looming reminders that peasants' sweat and taxes flowed upward into something grand and unreachable. But before we step too close, let's linger outside the walls, where the castle towns, known as yokamachi, spread like roots around the fortress. Here, the peasants and townsfolk lived in cramped houses, their thatched roofs pressed shoulder to shoulder, narrow alleys snaked between them, alive with chatter, clatter, and smells both savory and sour. Imagine the scene: a fishmonger's stall, the sharp tang of salted mackerel filling the air, a potter shaping clay bowls, his wheel creaking as wet hands coaxed form from mud, children darting between legs, clutching sticks, pretending to be samurai, and over it all, the shadow of the castle looming, as if watching every move. The peasants who lived near castle towns often found themselves pressed into extra duties. Not only did they work the land, but they also had to supply goods and labor for the bustling needs of the garrison inside. Think of it like living next to a giant vacuum cleaner, always ready to suck up whatever spare you had. Food here took on new dimensions. Rice still dominated, but with markets came variety. A peasant passing through might catch a whiff of grilled skewers, little bits of chicken, sizzling and dripping fat onto hot coals. The smell would make mouths water, even if buying such treats was out of reach for most. Imagine walking past with your stomach growling, trying not to stare too long. Sometimes a cheap snack could be afforded. Roasted sweet potatoes, their skins charred black, their insides soft and steaming. Bite into one, and the sweetness floods your tongue, surprising in its richness. For a peasant who had known only thin rice gruel for weeks, such a potato was like a golden treasure. Have you ever had something so simple, yet felt it was the best thing you'd ever eaten? That was the joy of these humble moments. But inside the castle walls, life was entirely different. There, the daimyo and his retainers feasted on dishes peasants could scarcely imagine: plates of river fish glazed in miso, bowls of steaming noodles, delicate slices of pickled vegetables arranged like art. Sake flowed, warming the bellies of warriors who laughed at stories and clinked cups deep into the night. This contrast was sharp, almost cruel. The peasants worked the land, grew the rice, paid the taxes, yet they tasted little of the abundance their labor created. Imagine growing a perfect orchard of peaches, only to never eat one yourself. That was the peasant's paradox. And yet, peasants still found ways to laugh. They whispered jokes about the samurai's polished armor, saying it was like wrapping yourself in a teapot. They laughed at the absurdity of rules that forbade them from carrying swords, as if a bamboo stick in a farmer's hands could ever rival a blade. Humor was their shield, soft but steady. Let me anchor us with a fact here. During the Sengoku period, from the 15th to 17th centuries, castles multiplied across Japan. Each daimyo built his own fortress to show power protect his lands, and house his samurai, and surrounding each castle were thousands of peasants, their daily grind feeding the hungry stomach of the system. The castle towns also held markets, bustling places, full of noise. Picture the wooden stalls, rows of baskets filled with greens, dried fish strung like garlands, herbs bundled tightly with twine. Merchants called out, voices rising and falling like waves. A peasant might trade a bundle of firewood for a handful of dried persimmons, their wrinkled skins sticky and sweet, like nature's candy. Even smells told stories. The rich smoke of grilling fish mixed with the sour scent of fermenting soy sauce, the earthy aroma of straw mats drying in the sun, blended with a sharp tang of pickled radish. To walk those alleys was to walk through a symphony of scents, each one tugging at memory and hunger. And above it all, the castle walls reminded you this world was not yours. They stood like silent judges, tall and unyielding. The samurai walked within, armored, confident, their footsteps echoing across wooden floors. Outside, peasants bent low, their sandals scuffing dirt, their backs aching. Yet beauty lingered even here. Lanterns swayed in evening breezes, their glow turning the streets golden. The sound of a shamisen, plucked softly by a street musician, drifted through the alleys. Children, still laughing, chased fireflies, their hands closing around glowing specks of magic. For a moment, even in the shadow of power, life felt light. And so, the peasants carried on. They tilled, they paid, they endured. They walked through markets, with coins tucked tight in sleeves, bought chestnuts when they could, smiled when neighbors shared. Their lives were not free, not fair, not easy, but they were lived, fully, stubbornly, beautifully. And as night falls in the castle town, let us step back once more. The drums inside the fortress beat faintly, marking some ritual. The market stalls close, shutters drawn, fires die down. A silence spreads, broken only by the soft chirp of crickets. The castle looms, but the peasants dream anyway, curling under thin blankets, imagining perhaps a sweeter life in another world. And as we leave this town behind, let your mind wander. For now, the path may lead us not into walls or markets, but into the deep silence of the temples, where monks chant and incense curls into the air like whispered prayers. The road bends again, and this time, let us step into the quiet shadows of a temple. Picture a wooden gate rising before us, painted deep red, its beams weathered by sun and rain. Beyond it, the air shifts. It feels stiller, cooler, as if time itself slows the moment you step inside. Gravel crunches softly beneath your feet, and overhead, wind stirs the tall pines, their needles whispering like an unseen choir. For the peasants, temples were more than places of worship. They were anchors. When hunger bit, when taxes crushed, when storms destroyed fields, temples stood steady. People came not only with prayers, but with burdens too heavy to carry alone. Imagine a peasant woman kneeling before a shrine, her hands pressed together, her forehead nearly touching the floor. She prays not for riches, but for one more healthy harvest. Beside her, a man murmurs for his child's fever to break. The scent of incense curls around them, thick and sweet, clinging to their clothes. Bells ring softly, their chimes rolling out into the hills like ripples across a pond. Let me tell you something curious. Buddhism and Shinto blended deeply in peasant lives. One moment, they bowed before a Buddha. The next, they tied paper fortunes to a Shinto tree. Faith was not about choosing one over the other. It was about reaching for comfort wherever comfort could be found. Imagine living each day unsure if tomorrow's rice would stretch far enough. Wouldn't you too search for every possible blessing? The temples also offered food. At least sometimes, monks prepared simple meals: rice, pickled vegetables, perhaps tofu, if the harvest had been kind. Visitors might be given a bowl, steaming and fragrant. Imagine sitting cross-legged on a tatami mat, lifting that bowl with both hands, and sipping broth so warm it seems to melt the chill from your bones. It wasn't a feast, but compared to thin gruel at home, it was almost luxurious. One historical note here: Zen Buddhism, which spread strongly during the Kamakura period, around the 13th century, emphasized simplicity and meditation. For peasants, this meant that temples weren't always distant or intimidating. They became places where silence itself could be comforting. Sit beneath a pine, listen to the wind, and for a moment, the weight of taxes and toil eased. And yet, the temples too had their own demands. Peasants sometimes had to provide labor for temple upkeep, repairing roofs, carrying timber, sweeping endless gravel paths. Imagine raking gravel into perfect patterns only to have leaves fall and scatter your work before it was done. But still, the act itself could soothe. There's something oddly calming about repetition, isn't there? Like folding laundry, or stirring soup, or walking the same path each day. Festivals, linked to temples, brought bursts of joy. Lanterns glowed like tiny suns strung along pathways. Drums thundered, chants rose, and dancers in bright robes moved as if possessed by the music. Stalls sold treats, skewers of dango, soft rice dumplings, grilled until lightly charred, brushed with sweet soy sauce. Imagine biting into one. Sticky, chewy, smoky, and sweet all at once. To a peasant, that taste was unforgettable, a rare moment of indulgence. Have you ever saved something small, like a chocolate bar or a favorite tea, for a hard day, and found it transformed into the most comforting thing you've ever eaten? That was the magic of dango. At temple festivals, a peasant might carry that memory like a candle through weeks of hardship. Temples also guarded knowledge. Monks read and wrote, skills most peasants never learned. To step into a temple and hear chants in rolling syllables was to step into a world of mystery. Words had a power here. Stories of the Buddha, parables of kindness and humility, tales of karma, all of them shaped the way peasants saw their own lives. Work hard, endure, suffer now, but perhaps find peace later, in another life. It was both comfort and cage. Still, temples were sanctuaries in subtle ways. Imagine a storm raging outside, wind tearing at roofs, rain flooding fields, and inside the temple, calm, the sound of rain softened by wooden walls. the glow of lanterns steady, the floor dry beneath your knees, even if nothing could be done for the crops, even if taxes would still come. For that one night, peace wrapped itself around you, and humor, yes, even here. Monks sometimes teased peasants, telling riddles or jokes about the foolishness of men who tried to bribe the gods with too little sake. Peasants laughed quietly, knowing they had no more to give but laughter itself. And laughter, in its way, was a form of prayer. There's another sensory detail here. The bells, large, bronze temple bells, struck with a heavy wooden beam, sent deep tones rolling across valleys. The sound wasn't sharp, but round and low, like the earth itself speaking. For peasants, hearing that bell was like being reminded, you are small, yes, but you are part of something vast. Doesn't that thought feel strangely soothing? Even now, as night deepened, peasants sometimes slept in temple grounds during festivals or journeys. Picture lying beneath the eaves, the tatami mats beneath you, faintly smelling of straw and dust. The air is cool, but your belly is warm with soup. You hear the last murmurs of monks, the flutter of paper lanterns in wind, the distant bark of a fox. Slowly, your eyes grow heavy, your breath slows, and you slip into dreams. Temples were whispers of hope in brutal lives. They could not erase the taxes, the hunger, the unending labor, but they gave peasants something harder to measure: stillness, a chance to kneel, to breathe, to believe. And as we step out from those temple gates, leaving behind the scent of incense and the echo of bells, let your mind wander to where peasants returned, their homes, their families, their hearths. For even in hardship, the glow of fire at night carried its own promise. The path leads us back again, not to fields or temples, but to the heart of peasant life, the home. Imagine a small hut of wood and straw, its walls darkened by smoke, its roof patched from last winter's storms. The door creaks softly as it slides open, and we step inside. The air is dim, lit only by a faint glow from the hearth. A pot hangs above the fire, steam curling from its rim, carrying the earthy scent of barley and miso. The floor is earthen, cool beneath bare feet, and mats of woven straw soften the corners where children sit, their eyes reflecting the firelight like tiny lanterns. Here, peasants gathered after long days, the fields, the taxes, the weight of lords and samurai. All of it paused, just for a little while, when the family sat close together. Imagine the sound, the crackle of firewood, the soft slurp of soup, the murmur of a lullaby whispered to a sleepy child. Food was simple, a bowl of rice, mixed with barley, perhaps, thin soup with a few vegetables, maybe even tofu, if the season allowed. Pickled radish added a sharp, tangy bite, waking tired tongues. On rare days, a grilled fish split between everyone, its salty skin crackling, its tender flesh pulled apart with eager fingers. Meals were modest, but they were shared, and in sharing, they grew larger than they were. Let me tell you, peasants sometimes saved small treats for children: a sweet chestnut roasted until golden, a persimmon dried until it tasted like honey. Imagine a child's face lighting up at that taste. as if the whole world had turned sweet for one moment. Have you ever seen joy bloom from something so small? That was the hearth's magic. The homes themselves were humble, often with a single room. Smoke from the hearth stained the rafters, curling upward into shadows. In winter, cold air leaked through every crack, and families huddled under straw quilts, their breath misting in the dark. In summer, the air grew heavy, buzzing with mosquitoes, and sleep came only with the faint relief of breezes sneaking through doors left ajar. Yet these spaces held laughter too. Picture a father returning from the fields, dropping heavily to the floor, sighing in exhaustion, and then his child climbs into his lap, tugging at his sleeve, demanding a story. And so, even as muscles ache, he smiles and tells of a fox spirit who tricked a samurai, or of a dragon sleeping beneath a mountain. The child giggles, wide-eyed, and for a little while, the father forgets the weight of his own world. Neighbors, too, often gathered by hearths. On cold nights, families crowded together, trading tales and warmth. Someone strummed a shamisen with calloused fingers. Someone else sang a folk song, soft and lilting, about love or harvests or seasons. The fire popped, sparks danced, and time felt slower. There was always work, of course. Women mended clothes by firelight, their needles flashing. Children braided straw ropes. Men carved handles for tools. Even in rest, hands kept busy. But in that busy quiet, there was peace, the kind of peace that comes not from idleness, but from shared purpose. Let me anchor us with history. In peasant homes of the Edo period, the hearth, the irori, was the center of life. It provided heat, light, and food. It was where stories were told, where prayers were whispered, where life turned in small, steady circles. Without it, the hut was just walls. With it, it was a world. Sometimes, when sake could be afforded, thin, warm, and sharp, laughter grew louder. Jokes slipped out. Teasing softened into giggles. A neighbor might boast about a turnip the size of a baby, and everyone laughed, not because it was true, but because in laughter, the cold seemed further away. Imagine lying beside that fire after a long day. Your stomach is full enough, your body tired, your mind heavy. Outside, the night hums with crickets. An owl calls softly. Inside, the embers glow red, pulsing like a heartbeat. You curl under a quilt of patched cloth, feeling its weight, hearing the gentle breath of family beside you. Slowly, your own breath steadies, your eyelids grow heavy, and you slip into dreams. The brutality of peasant life was real. Endless work, hunger, taxes, the harshness of lords. But so too was resilience. They endured, they laughed, they prayed. They told stories by firelight, roasted chestnuts, sang songs. They found light in the smallest sparks, warmth in the thinnest blankets, hope in the darkest seasons. And perhaps, in their own quiet way, they remind us tonight, life is never only its hardships. It is also its hearths, its laughter, its moments of sweetness, like a rice dumpling on a festival night, or a chestnut in a child's hand. And so, as our journey through feudal Japan draws to a close, let us sit here a while longer by the fire. The embers glow gently, the air hums softly, The story, like the day, winds down into silence. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off at some point, and I hope you did, let me know below. Sweet dreams, and thank you for sharing this calm path with me. Until next time.